Step away. You fit the description.
I'm the one who stopped him.
That's what they all say.
The body camera footage would later show a truth no one expected. The robbery was already over. The suspect already face down on the tile, and the man in handcuffs wasn't the criminal, but the one who stopped it, a fact an IC agent would ignore with consequences that would end his career and send him to federal prison for 17 years. It was 6:41 p.m. on a warm Thursday evening when the attempted robbery unfolded inside Mercado Verde, a small family-owned grocery tucked between a laundromat and a payday loan store in a quiet San Diego suburb, the kind of place where the owner knew most customers by name and nothing more serious than shoplifting ever happened. The store's security footage would later be slowed down frame by frame, studied by investigators and jurors alike, but in real time the moment was chaos. A man in a black hoodie jumped the counter, yanked at the register, and shouted incoherently while the cashier froze, hands trembling in the air. What happened next took less than 5 seconds. A customer near the drink coolers, a black man in his mid-30s wearing jeans, running shoes, and a gray zip-up hoodie, moved with a speed and precision that didn't belong in a grocery aisle. He closed distance, hooked the robber's arm, swept his legs, and guided him to the floor with controlled force, careful not to strike, not to escalate, not to lose control. Witnesses would later struggle to describe it. Some said it looked rehearsed. Others said it looked calm. One woman said it looked like muscle memory. The robber never landed a punch, never reached the exit. Within seconds he was prone, wrists restrained with plastic zip ties the customer pulled from a box behind the counter, the same kind used for inventory. The black man, his name was Daniel Brooks, sat back on a milk crate, breathing steady, eyes scanning the room, voice low but firm as he told the clerk to call 911 and told everyone else to stay where they were. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't celebrate. He didn't touch the robber again. By the time the first sirens echoed faintly down the street, the scene was static. One suspect on the floor, one citizen maintaining distance, a dozen witnesses already pulling out their phones. What no one in that store knew was that Brooks was an active-duty U.S. Navy SEAL, home on temporary assignment, trained in de-escalation, close-quarters combat, and rules of engagement drilled into him for over a decade. What no one could see was his military ID tucked into his wallet, or the discipline behind his stillness. All anyone could see was a black man standing over a subdued suspect in a neighborhood where that image carried assumptions long before facts arrived. The first uniformed police unit was still minutes away when a black SUV with federal plates rolled to a stop outside. Inside was ICE Special Agent Mark Harlan, 11 years into federal service, who had been in the area following up on an unrelated administrative lead when he heard a garbled call over a shared channel about a possible suspect detained at a grocery store. Harlan decided to respond on his own. His body cam activated automatically as he stepped through the door, scanning the room with a posture that suggested he expected resistance. The camera caught what his eyes locked onto immediately. Not the man on the floor, not the shaken cashier, not the witnesses pointing and talking over each other, but Brooks, standing calmly near the milk crate with his hands visible at his sides. "Step away from him," Harlan ordered, voice sharp, already reaching for his cuffs. Brooks complied instantly, taking 2 slow steps back. "I'm not the robber," he said evenly. "He is." I stopped him. The words barely registered. Harlan didn't ask how, didn't ask witnesses, didn't look at the zip ties or the register drawer lying open on the counter. He asked one question instead, the one that would define the case. "Are you legally allowed to be in this country?" The store went silent. Phones kept recording. Brooks blinked once, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "I'm active duty military. My ID is in my pocket." Harlan shook his head. "Don't reach for anything." Brooks froze, hands still open. "I'm complying," he said. "You can verify." "Turn around," Harlan cut in. "You fit the description." There was no description. Dispatch logs would later confirm that none had been issued. Witnesses protested. The cashier pointed at the robber on the floor and shouted that Brooks was the one who saved him. A woman near the entrance yelled that the cameras would show everything. Harlan ignored them all. He cuffed Brooks while the actual robber remained unattended, face down on the tile, groaning softly. As the cuffs clicked shut, the body cam captured Brooks' voice, still controlled, still calm. "This is a mistake," he said. "You're arresting the wrong person." Harlan responded with the phrase that would later be played back in court over and over again. "That's what they all say." When local police finally arrived, the scene made no sense. The suspect was already restrained. The witnesses were angry. The man in cuffs was calm, cooperative, and insisting on verification. A responding sergeant asked Harlan directly why Brooks was detained. "Immigration check," Harlan replied. He refused to comply. That statement was false, and the cameras caught that too. When Brooks' military ID was finally retrieved and verified, when the Navy liaison confirmed his identity and service, the temperature in the room shifted instantly. Phones stopped shaking. Officers looked at one another. Harlan stepped back, suddenly unsure. Brooks was uncuffed without apology. The robber was finally taken into custody. And as Brooks adjusted his wrists, red marks already forming beneath the plastic, he said something quietly that no one in the store would forget and that the jury would later hear in perfect audio clarity. "The robbery ended when I put him on the floor," he said. "Everything after that was on you." The footage from inside Mercado Verde didn't stop rolling when Daniel Brooks was uncuffed, and what happened in the minutes after his release would prove even more damaging than the arrest itself, because it captured the moment the narrative collapsed and the system began turning on one of its own. As local officers took control of the scene, the body cam audio picked up overlapping voices, witnesses demanding explanations, the cashier pointing repeatedly at the security cameras, a sergeant asking why a federal agent had initiated an immigration detention during an active robbery response. And in the middle of it all, Agent Mark Harlan standing rigid, jaw clenched, suddenly aware that every decision he'd made was now preserved in high definition from multiple angles. Brooks stood off to the side, hands still visible out of habit, answering questions calmly, never raising his voice, never embellishing, simply stating facts. He intervened. He restrained the suspect. He waited for police. When a patrol officer finally asked what unit Brooks served with, the answer landed like a dropped weight. "Naval Special Warfare," Brooks said. "Active duty." The officer paused, looked at him again, then looked at Harlan. That pause would later be cited in testimony as the moment everyone understood the gravity of what had just happened. Within 20 minutes, a Navy command liaison arrived, followed shortly by internal affairs from the local department. Not because they had jurisdiction over Harlan, but because they understood the potential fallout of a federal agent acting unilaterally, ignoring witnesses, and detaining the wrong person in a public setting saturated with cameras. Harlan attempted to justify his actions on scene, claiming Brooks had been uncooperative and that the situation was fluid, but those explanations unraveled almost immediately when supervisors reviewed the footage in real time on a tablet pulled from a patrol car. The video showed Brooks complying at every step. It showed Harlan interrupting witness statements. It showed the question about immigration status asked before any attempt to understand what crime had even occurred. And it showed the robber, still face down, being ignored while the focus remained fixed on the black man who had stopped him. By the time Harlan left the store, escorted to his vehicle by a senior local officer in what witnesses described as a protective courtesy, the story was already spreading. A customer had posted a 30-second clip to social media with the caption, "Hero arrested, robber ignored." Within an hour, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. By morning, it was everywhere. ICE supervisors placed Harlan on administrative leave before sunrise, not out of contrition, but out of necessity. The agency issued a brief statement acknowledging an ongoing review, but internally the reaction was far more severe. Harlan's enforcement history was pulled within hours, and what analysts found raised alarms far beyond a single incident. Over an 8-year period, Harlan had initiated dozens of discretionary stops without warrants, often outside coordinated operations, often justified only by vague language like instinct or fit the profile. The demographic pattern was impossible to ignore. Civilian complaints that had once been dismissed as unsubstantiated suddenly took on new weight when paired with body cam footage that left little room for interpretation. Investigators noticed something else too. In several prior cases, Harlan had escalated encounters after being challenged, particularly when individuals asserted their rights or presented credentials he hadn't expected. Brooks' case wasn't an anomaly. It was a trigger. Federal prosecutors were looped in within days. not because of public pressure alone, but because the evidence suggested potential violations of civil rights under color of law. Brooks gave a single sworn statement. He didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't call for retribution. He simply described the sequence of events and emphasized one point repeatedly. The danger wasn't just that he was detained, but that the actual threat was deprioritized because of who Harlan believed looked suspicious. That framing resonated deeply with investigators. Meanwhile, Harlan retained counsel and declined further interviews. His attorney argued that he acted in good faith during a chaotic situation, but that claim disintegrated as more footage surfaced. Store cameras showed Brooks subduing the robber cleanly. Witness videos showed Harlan entering with his cuffs already in hand. Audio transcripts highlighted the absence of any lawful basis for an immigration inquiry. The question that kept surfacing in internal memos was blunt. Why him? Why Brooks? The answer, prosecutors would later argue, was equally blunt. Because Harlan saw a black man exercising control in a space where he didn't expect one to have it. As weeks passed, the case expanded. Subpoenas were issued. Training records were reviewed. Supervisors were questioned under oath about why prior complaints hadn't resulted in corrective action. Each answer revealed layers of institutional complacency, an environment where aggressive enforcement was praised, where metrics mattered more than method, where discretion went largely unchecked. When the indictment finally came down, it was sweeping. Harlan was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and making materially false statements. The potential sentence stunned even seasoned observers. 17 years. As news broke, the same clip from Mercado Verde played on screens across the country, but now it was accompanied by context, analysis, and a chilling consensus. This wasn't about a single bad call. It was about what happens when authority operates without accountability. Brooks returned to duty quietly, refusing interviews, releasing only a brief statement through the Navy affirming his confidence in the justice process. Harlan, once a confident federal agent, now faced a reality no amount of authority could shield him from. The cameras had done their job. The system, belatedly, was beginning to do the same. The trial that followed was never really about Daniel Brooks, even though his name anchored every headline, because by the time opening arguments began, the evidence had reframed the case into something far larger and far more dangerous. A federal agent who had repeatedly acted on bias, ignored procedure, and lied when confronted, finally caught on camera in a way that could not be explained away. The courtroom in the Southern District of California was packed every day, reporters lining the back wall, civil rights observers filling the benches, and a quiet but unmistakable presence of military uniforms seated behind Brooks. Not as a show of force, but as a statement of fact. Brooks himself testified for just under an hour. He wore a plain suit, no ribbons, no insignia, and spoke the same way he had in the grocery store. Measured, precise, unemotional. He walked the jury through the robbery, the restraint, his decision to sit back and wait rather than flee or dominate the scene, and then the moment Agent Mark Harlan walked in, already treating him as the primary threat. "I followed commands," Brooks said. "I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I didn't escalate. I expected verification. It never came." Prosecutors didn't dwell on Brooks' SEAL training, only enough to establish that he knew exactly how dangerous uncontrolled situations could become, and that his restraint wasn't accidental. What they focused on instead was Harlan's conduct after the fact. The jury watched synchronized footage from 4 different cameras: Harlan's body cam, the store's security system, a bystander's phone, and a patrol dash cam that captured the aftermath. They watched Harlan ignore witnesses. They heard him ask about immigration status before asking what crime had occurred. They heard him claim Brooks was uncooperative, then watched Brooks comply in real time. They heard the phrase, "You fit the description," repeated without any description ever being produced. The defense tried to argue stress, confusion, and the split-second nature of law enforcement decision-making, but the prosecution dismantled that narrative frame by frame. This wasn't a split-second decision, the assistant U.S. attorney told the jury. This was a series of choices, each one an opportunity to correct course, each one ignored. When internal ICE records were entered into evidence, the tone of the room shifted. Analysts testified about patterns, stop data, complaint logs, dismissed internal reviews that suddenly looked very different when paired with video evidence. An expert in federal use of authority standards explained that immigration enforcement does not grant carte blanche to detain individuals without cause, especially not in the middle of an unrelated criminal investigation. A former ICE supervisor, testifying under subpoena, admitted that Harlan had been flagged before but never formally disciplined. He got results, the supervisor said, and results were valued. That sentence echoed through the courtroom. When it was Harlan's turn to testify, the contrast was stark. Gone was the confident agent captured on camera. He spoke carefully, often evasively, insisting he had felt uneasy and concerned for safety. Unable to articulate why Brooks posed a threat beyond vague references to control of the scene. Under cross-examination, those justifications collapsed. "You didn't secure the robber," the prosecutor said. "You secured Mr. Brooks." Harlan had no answer. "You didn't ask a single witness what happened," she continued. Silence. "You didn't review the cameras." Silence again. And when asked by a local sergeant why Mr. Brooks was detained, he said he refused to comply. That wasn't true, was it? Harlan hesitated. The body cam clip played again, Brooks' hands visible, voice calm. "No," Harlan finally said. "It wasn't." The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing weeks later was where the weight of the case fully landed. Federal guidelines suggested a range far lower than what the prosecution requested, but the judge made clear this was not a standard abuse of authority case. "You were not merely negligent," she said, addressing Harlan directly. "You were willfully indifferent to constitutional limits, and when confronted, you lied to preserve your authority." Victim impact statements followed, though Brooks declined to deliver one. Instead, the grocery store clerk spoke, voice shaking, describing the fear of watching the wrong man be taken away while the real danger lay ignored. A civil rights advocate testified about the chilling effects such actions have on communities. And finally, the judge spoke the words that stunned the room. 17 years in federal custody. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The sentence reflected not just the Mercado Verde incident, but the pattern it exposed, enhanced for obstruction and false statements. Harlan was remanded immediately. As marshals led him away, cameras flashed. But the most striking image came later. Brooks standing quietly near the exit, expression unreadable, declining to comment as reporters shouted questions. In the months that followed, the fallout spread outward. ICE announced revised engagement protocols. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Training curricula were rewritten. Civil settlements were reached quietly, without admission of wrongdoing, but with enough zeros to signal accountability. Brooks returned to his unit, deploying again without ceremony. He never became a public figure by choice. The footage from Mercado Verde, however, lived on, shown in courtrooms, academies, and oversight hearings as a case study in what happens when bias overrides duty. The robbery itself became a footnote. What mattered was the moment after, when power met proof and chose denial. The judge summarized it best in her closing remarks. "This case is not about hindsight," she said. "It's about what was visible in the moment, what was ignored, and what that says about how authority was exercised." Years from now, long after headlines faded, the cameras would still show the same thing. A man on the floor who had committed a crime, a man standing who had stopped it, and an agent who could not tell the difference until it was far too late.